The EV conversation left the hype phase and has entered an uncomfortable but more useful reality. In this episode of Field Frequency, I'm joined by automotive journalist and car and driver contributing editor John Voelcker. In this episode, we talk about what an EV pullback really means, why some products miss the mark, and how charging and consumer education still shape adoption, and why profitability, not ideology, must drive strategy. This isn't an EV collapse, it's a reset, and John helps explain what the market has actually taught us. Let's get into it. Welcome to another episode of Field Frequency. Today I'm joined by John Voelcker. John, so good to have you today.
Thank you for having me. It's first time I've been on Field Frequency, so it's always exciting to do a new show.
Yeah, well, glad that you made time for us today, and this would be your first time on Field Frequency, and hopefully not your last. But John, want to just kind of start with some background, entry point into your expertise in the industry, how you have got to this place where you're at. Take us through your path into automotive journalism. You got a wide berth of background in that space, but I'd like to kind of narrow in what drew you to the space and how have EVs become a central part of your focus over time?
So the first thing to know is that I was born a car nerd, like many, if not most, automotive journalists. When you get any group of a dozen of us together, it gets esoteric really quick. And there's arguments about obscure, arcane points of things that happened 30 years ago. But it took me until I was about 50 to make it pay. My so-called career has been nonlinear, I think, is the best way to put it. But after a particularly bad job experience in the mid-2000s, I was at that sort of middle-age point where I thought, am I happy doing this? What would I like to do? And fortuitously at that point, IEEE Spectrum, which was the outlet that really taught me how to be a reporter, writer, editor, and a signing editor, the magazine of the Electrical Engineers Professional Society, called and said, hey, we are starting this feature called Top 10 Tech Cars. Would you like to write it? And I said, oh, yes. And so I did that for a while. It seemed to go well. And through about 5 years worth of freelancing and consulting and doing sort of acting, magazine, and internet jobs here and there, I really realized that was what I liked doing best. And in February of 2009, I got hired to be the founding editor of Green Car Reports, which at that point had, I think, 1,000 page views or some irrelevant number. The idea was to do short hit news coverage of things in what we call then the green car world. I don't think that term gets used so much, but at that point it was higher fuel efficiency, which was very much a government regulatory thing going on, the growth of hybrids, specifically the Prius. And because I had had my first ride in a Tesla fortuitously in September 2006, it was actually number 3, I knew that the electric car thing had some legs. And if you're going to join an established industry, which is fairly competitive, at age 50, you got to have a gimmick. And I looked around and found there wasn't really any good writing about green cars or cars with electrified powertrains, whatever sort. We also covered natural gas and hydrogen and, all the rest of it. And I decided maybe that was a niche for me. And as electric cars came in, it worked fairly well. So I was editor of Green Car Reports for 9 years, over which time I think I wrote something like 4,800 articles and edited about 6,000 more. I drove over 400 cars. I flew 400,000 air miles. We did a lot and loved every minute of it. The site got a certain amount of credibility. And we were lucky enough to sell the company to another larger internet company. And so when the payouts were done, I realized that not only was I fried, but I was 10 years older than anyone else in the company, including the CEO. So I respectfully said, I'd like to take a sabbatical. And my boss was into it and the CEO was into it. Then we hit the PR department of the new corporate overlords, HR, who said 3.5 years ago, you signed that you had read and accepted all of our HR terms, and you clearly didn't read page 72, paragraph B, which says what you want is impossible. So I quit with the blessing of my boss again. bought a used Chevy Suburban off a car lot in Phoenix, filled it with old car parts, drove it around the country, and after a 6-month break, became essentially a freelance writer about these topics, which is, to my shock, where I've now been for 7 years. But it's worked out. I publish in Car and Driver. I've had stuff in Wired. I've had stuff in The Verge, Inside EVs, Charged EVs. There's a whole list. It has been rewarding for me just because we started out with me being a nerd, and I have aggregated an incredible volume of mostly useless, but occasionally useful knowledge about EVs, the industry, charging, the whole energy ecosystem around them, and sort of the global automotive world, how it comes together and how regulation hits that. So there's usually stuff I'm not sure if that's a career path I recommend to anyone, but that's how it happened.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing how we end up where we're at. It's never a straight line. It's always lefts and right turns and steps forward, steps back. All of those publications that you mentioned, of course, seen material as a contributing editor. You are a contributing editor to Car and Driver. I've seen some of your work there. And of course, you're very visible on LinkedIn and other places. And, you just recently released an article in Car and Driver regarding EVs, and I thought it was very insightful. I thought it was well put together and pretty expansive. Yeah, yeah. So, I one of the topics in that article that just came out was around the pullback, and I wanted to look at that in terms of defining what that means. Automakers say they're pulling back. We've seen the announcements with the Ford Lightning, well publicized. We see other information coming on from different automotive OEMs. And is there a pullback? What are they actually pulling back from? Is this volume? Is this timelines? Is this capital risk? What is that pullback really look like from your perspective?
The word I used for the title didn't make it into the online title, but the word in the print title was reset. And I think essentially we have now learned 15 years worth of buyer information, production information, charging, a lot of the business lessons around EVs, home charging, network charging. And I think that there have been some products that simply didn't take, and we can talk about those in a minute. But we now know better where electric cars work really well, where they may work, and where they probably don't with today's technology, today's production, and today's pricing work. I don't want to say scattershot, but people have tried almost everything since 2011. There have been low range, there have been a lot of compact hatchbacks, frankly, but there have been other things. We now have 3-row electric SUVs. We have stupidly fast electric sports cars or performance cars. We have some magnificent technology startups, things like Lucid, which just makes lovely cars, very expensive cars. But I doubt anyone in the auto industry could have conceived of a luxurious, good-looking, 4-seat luxury sedan that will run 400 miles, but also accelerate 0 to 60 in 1.9 seconds, which I have not done. And honestly, I'm not sure if I ever want to do that. But electric cars offer a lot in terms of performance as well as convenience. And I think it's becoming clearer where the lowest hanging fruit is, which, quite frankly, I think is probably compact SUVs and maybe mid-sized SUVs. Sedans, certainly for other markets, but this is America. We no longer want sedans. Sedans are falling as a portion of the market. So everything has become an SUV, even if they're actually hatchbacks. Backed up a little bit. Don't use the H word, you'll scare the customers. But so I think we know that. We know that households that can afford to buy a new car, that have a household income, and that is a smaller and smaller portion of America, to be honest. If you have a household income to walk in and buy a new car, you have a 4 out of 5 chance of having dedicated off-street parking, which means it's somewhere between 4 feet and 20 feet from electricity, which means you can charge your car at home overnight. Okay. That is how the vast majority of miles today on EVs get logged. And I'm talking about personally owned EVs. The fleet side is interesting in certain areas, even more compelling, but there's some different things going on there and it's much lower volume. But we know now that people do charge at home, and what we also know is that as we move from early adopter, and I'm probably one of them, but the person who walks into the showroom corrects the salesman when they make an incorrect assumption, tells the salesman in great, painful, remorseless detail how the car works. Those folks already knew what they were buying. We're now into early mass adoption. These folks do not. They have learned about EVs through the same place everybody learns about everything: friends, relations, neighbors, and coworkers. And increasingly, someone has an EV, right? And what's that? Aren't they weird? Don't they die? No, actually, it works fine. Here's what I do: I charge it at home overnight. There are many people who love the idea of never having to go to a gas station, of leaving home every morning with a quote full tank. But fueling up with electricity requires a mindset change. No one has a gas pump in a garage. So we are all used to thinking of, I have a vehicle, I have to fuel it, and once or twice a week, I have to go to a place and do that, right? Somehow the cell phone on wheels metaphor never quite stuck because we're all used to plugging in our cell phones at night, right? Same thing with the EV. So we know those things. Certainly the public charging networks have a ways to go. We can talk about that down the road. But I think to answer your question, there is a reset toward what works, what people will buy, and what will make money for the.
So, yeah, agreed. Okay, so, obviously EVs have their own narratives in terms of cleaner to make, cleaner to operate, and all the narratives around that. But when you strip away the climate narrative, strip away the politics, just brass tacks, how much of the EV slowdown is really about cash burn becoming unacceptable, where companies aren't being, they're dropping models. The forecast on the amount of models that they were focused on has now been peeled back. Was that because the all EVs by 2030, 100% EV by 2030 narrative was unmoored maybe from market signals? It was the wrong message from the start. What does all that look like? Or is it just the OEMs aren't being profitable?
Sure. In the end, it comes down to OEMs have to make money. Couple of points I wanted to make. I'm not aware of any place in the US that ever said all EV by 2030. California, which is the most aggressive state in environmental regulation, set a target of all EV by 2035 for light duty vehicles. Probably won't make that, but 2030 was maybe a couple of European countries and or the UK. I'd have to go back and check, but 2030 was not a US number. The climate narrative, thankfully, we have moved away from the idea that people buy EVs to save the planet. They have that side effect, but it turns out that it's a really, really bad idea to talk about how you should buy this car instead of the one you thought you wanted because it's better for the world. That is not a way people buy cars. They have to buy cars because they like them, because they make them feel good, because they make other people envious, because they're good to drive, and because they save them money. And different households have different prioritizations of that. But EVs can tick most, if not all, of those boxes. And so where they tick those boxes most often are where we're focusing on. Clearly, car makers have to make money. The example I'd like to use, Toyota is the most profitable mass market car maker in the world, has been for a couple decades, if not longer, I'm not sure. That company spent north of $15 billion between 1995 and about 2004 on its hybrid program. They did not even break even on a single Prius until somewhere during the middle of the model run of the second generation Prius, let's say 2006 or something. If they didn't have so much profitability and so much cash, Wall Street would have been all over them and would have said, kill that program, you're losing your shirts. Unfortunately, the Detroit 2.5, Volkswagen, to some degree, the rest of the German industry also don't have that cash. And so they cannot simply say, we are going to spend money on this until we crack that nut. They have to invest more smartly. They have now pulled back the products that they knew were not going to make them money either ever or for a while. That's why Ford canceled its 3-row electric SUV, which was some ways into development, because they said, this is not going to be profitable soon enough for us. And actually, Ford CEO Jim Farley has now said, we will not sell any EV that isn't cash flow positive within a year, which is a fairly high bar. What is going on quietly in the background, and we're in this weird sort of lull year right now, is that 2 of the Detroit 2.5 are actually rethinking everything about EVs. So GM's actually had its what we used to call the Ultium EVs, everything from the Hummer on the top end to the Chevy Equinox, the bottom end. So they've got actually 12 different EV models on sale from 3 of their brands, which people often sometimes don't add up, but they've got a lot going on with EVs. They're in the process, very quietly, of doing some version of what Ford is, which is saying, okay, how do we make a single EV platform that is much cheaper to run, that uses cheaper batteries, that's cheaper to build, and that we can sell at lower prices for higher volumes? Because I think I share the belief that if you get a plethora of EVs with starting prices in the 20s and topping out 39, I don't know, somewhere in there, you will see a huge surge of interest in EVs, simply because we've all seen the numbers. The sales weighted average price of a new vehicle sold in the US right now is 50 grand. Now, that's a whole lot of really fancy pickup trucks. Did you know there are now 96-month car loans? You are underwater for something like 88 of them. But that's how those vehicles get sold, and they do last longer. There is, along with the sort of general societal worry this year about affordability, there is an even graver concern with affordability of new cars, because otherwise the US market is really in sort of a replacement phase. And so one of the proof points I use, there's a company called Slate, a startup with some Detroit veterans, some Silicon Valley veterans, that has proposed to bring to market a really, really simple 2-door, single cab electric pickup truck with a range of either 150 or 240 miles, priced at 25 grand. One color, any color you like, as long as it's gray, because they don't have a paint shop. They have composite panels. They come in gray. You can wrap the car for money. Late generated for something that was very theoretical and has yet to prove that it's going to be real. Slate generated a prodigious amount of interest. I went to the event. I saw the numbers on the social media. It was remarkable. And so Ford has gotten some interest with some very limited details on its own new platform for EVs, completely tearing apart and rethinking the assembly process. They are going to bring a compact or mid-sized pickup truck, all electric, to market on that platform in 2027, probably as a 28 model year. I'm one of the people who is fascinated to see that when it comes. And GM has some version of a new platform, much cheaper. Let's rethink every single piece of it to do a version of the same thing. Kia and Hyundai are going to have small and inexpensive EVs. We were supposed to get one, except with the tariffs that sort of landed out of left field, they have Kia has suspended its EV4 for the moment. But there are going to be less expensive EVs coming. Will they be full-size pickup trucks? No.
Well, John, I was trying to track through. You gave so much information. There was a lot to unpack. No, it's good. It's good. Lots of thought-provoking thoughts. One couple things I want to double-click on. Did I hear you say 93-month leases or fancy packages?
92 months, 84 months, 72, or 96, I guess.
Wow, that's so you're talking like 7 years worth of financing. It just seems untenable for a vehicle that what's it going to look like by the time it's paid off?
Gets the payment below whatever number of hundreds that you think you can afford at this moment. Sign here.
Wow. The other thing I had, you mentioned Detroit 2.5. For those that don't know what do you mean by that?
Sorry. Historically, back in my day, you used to say the big three, which was GM, Ford, and Chrysler in that order. GM is still GM, went through a bankruptcy, government-backed restructuring. It has now been steadily, consistently, remorselessly profitable for 10 years. Ford, it did not get rescued if you sort of overlooked the $6 billion low-interest loan that it got, but it has been through some ups and downs, but it it does interesting things with products and it's still very much a player. Those are the two.
Yeah.
The half is what we used to call Chrysler, which for a while was Daimler Chrysler when the Germans bought it. The joke there was, how do you pronounce Daimler Chrysler? The Chrysler is silent. That was not a happy marriage. They essentially offed it to a bunch of private equity bureaus. They went bankrupt too. Remarkably, it didn't get shut down or mashed into one of the other two. Sergio Marchionne from Fiat essentially took it on for free and used the cash from Ram and Jeep to rescue the rest of the company. This is a little bit revisionist. There's a lot more nuance here. So we had Fiat Chrysler from 2012 for about 10 years. I forget when the deal was done. And then PSA, which is a European company that was Peugeot plus Citroën plus Opel, merged with Fiat Chrysler. So now we have something called Stellantis, okay, which, if I remember, has its headquarters in the Netherlands and has a bucket ton of European brands, plus in the States, Ram and Jeep and Chrysler and Dodge. They have, I think, 14 brands, which is insane. But they have been, the US arm has been pushed and pulled by the European arm, sometimes used as a cash cow, sometimes told to make things it knows won't sell, but the US arm knows won't sell. In this case, some electric vehicles that were not ready for prime time doesn't even begin to describe it. So I think of it as the half. Half of the company is in Detroit. And we no longer say the big three because none of them globally is very big anymore.
Yeah. Well, thanks for unpacking that. That's the cool thing when I'm talking to an industry specialist that has a deep set of institutional knowledge. I sometimes have to translate for the audience. And then we do the same thing when people are talking the EV acronyms, the EMSP, the CPO. We have to sometimes double click on what that means for those that may not understand. But thanks for unpacking that. Another comment that you made was about the acknowledgement of GM's product line from the Hummer to the Chevy Equinox and everything in between, and how your comments, CEO of Jim Farley at Ford, no EVs unless they're profitable, and that consolidation to a platform that means, okay, we're going to focus on a product that's consolidated, so that way there is profitability in that. And then the comments around Slate, I think, points to that. Slate is the almost Jeep looking vehicle where you can have it with a bed or with a camper. Is that the one? I remember seeing something about that.
That's right. It's got some clever design. You can buy one of two kits to turn it from a two-door standard cab pickup into a two-door SUV with big long windows. There's a fastback one, but the square or more EV one just takes the back of the cab and moves it back, which is actually a neat design flourish. My suspicion is they will sell a lot more of the 240-mile version with the bigger battery, which they have not priced, and a lot more of the SUV version, simply because if you look at Rivian, another of the EV startups, they launched with a pickup truck, but they are now selling about two of their SUVs for every pickup they sell.
Yeah. Your good call out. Your article had kind of referred to full-size EV pickups as a product planning snafu, and you clarified what you meant. The full-size electric pickups were supposed to be a breakout moment because that was to bring to market a product that it goes beyond the Chevy Bolt and Nissan Leaf size or the constraints around Tesla's products. And so, the EV truck was supposed to take us to a place in the market that we hadn't been. What did the experiments, whether we're looking at through the framework of Workhorse, what was the other one? I cannot remember the name of that truck, but they came, and then they disappeared. It wasn't Workhorse. Maybe it was Workhorse, but either way, the pickup trucks, whether you're looking at Rivian, you're looking at the F-150.
I know the one you mean. Yes. I will think of the name directly after we sign off.
After we've signed off, we'll both remember it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, I actually drove it. Car and Driver has my road test of the thing, I think. But yes, well, those are what they are. Workhorse, I think, was only a commercial vehicle, as well as this other one that I can't remember.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced they ever seriously targeted the retail one. The retail ones, as you said, Ford F-150 Lightning, and then still in production at lower numbers than planned, I think, are the GMC Sierra EV and Chevy Silverado EV, and then, of course, the Hummer. I think what we learned from this experiment is a couple of things. The people who have Lightnings, by and large, love them, or at least the ones I see and the most vocal ones seem to love them. I've driven it. It's by far, to me, the best F-150. But one of the interesting things about the pickup truck market in North America is that it is unique to this continent. There are some interesting comparisons to these sort of weird specialized vehicles in other places around the world. There are these things called K cars, KEI cars, tiny, tiny little cars, limited in length, width, height, weight, engine size, and power in Japan. And they have some licensing advantages because they're so small. Something like a third, maybe close to half of Japan's market is K cars for this reason. They're unsellable in the rest of the world. Ditto Brazil, which has spent tens of billions of dollars on ethanol fueled vehicles. So much of Brazil's car fleet now runs on ethanol, which is great because they can build their own fuel at home from sugarcane, but they can't sell most other places in the world. My worry, frankly, is that full size body on frame pickup trucks and SUVs become the North American version of those cars. They are simply too honking big to sell in any kind of volume in the rest of the world. I was staggered to see one when I was driving through Amsterdam a couple summers ago, and I cannot imagine how you drive a Ram 1500 in a country like Holland. But in the US, we are now using them as commute vehicles, but they have to be supremely capable commute vehicles that have massive torque, massive towing power, whether or not you actually ever use those capabilities. My truck friends tell me it's called shiny bed syndrome. The people whose truck pickup beds have no scars because they've never actually put anything other than soft luggage into it. How many pickup truck owners tow? Probably about half. Ford, I'm sure, has data to the decimal point. But a lot of people want to have that capability for the boat they want to buy. And this sounds like a diss on truck owners. It's not meant to be. But what it is that a large portion of America is buying very profitable vehicles from its 2.5 makers that give them far more capabilities than they need and do it by using prodigious quantities of fuel. Less now, but remember in the emissions rules that came in 2012, it was all about footprint. And the bigger the vehicle, the lower the ramp on raising your gas mileage. So it's easier to make trucks comply than it was to make small hatchbacks, unless they didn't emit anything at all, hence EV hatchbacks. But it's very, very hard because electric cars are so efficient to get the amount of energy into an electric truck required not just to move the truck around, that's easy math, to move the truck and an 8,000-pound trailer, which also leads to the aerodynamic problem because the thing that eats most of the energy in an electric car above 30 miles an hour is not moving mass, because you get some of that back in regenerative braking. It's pushing it aside. And that is an exponential increase in energy.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm a nerd.
Yeah, no, hey, it's all good. You're educating us, and it's Lordstown Endurance. I had to look it up.
Well
It was bugging
done.
me.
Yes.
Lordstown Endurance. Yeah. Well, so, and to the comment of the vehicle that is really able to pull, it's always that variance between actual use case and aspirational, i.e., the boat you want to buy, the boat you intend to buy. But it's well, and again, it echoes some of the resistance to, hey, how far can I go in this car? Can I go across the country in this car? Maybe I don't want an EV. Well, did you go across the country in a gasoline powered vehicle, or how often do you do that? I mean, but use case and right application.
That to me is the perfect segue, though, into one of your questions about charging. So let us say you are a household who can buy a new vehicle. So you buy a nice electric compact or midsize crossover, and you're quite happy with it. It turns out you love plugging it in every night, and you realize you haven't been to a gas station in 4 months and so forth. Great. Time to go to grandma's. Now, you probably have the same average 2.4 vehicles in your family. So if you're nervous, you're not going to take the EV. But a lot of people turn out to like driving their EVs better than driving their other non-EV vehicles.
Sure.
There is a fast charging network out there growing rapidly across America. It is almost unknown to anyone who is not already an EV driver. And I think it's fair to say that the salespeople at the independently owned and operated third-party franchised auto dealerships that are the only way legally to buy most of the cars in this country, including most of the EVs, Tesla aside, are not particularly good at explaining what fast charging is, what, say, the top 6 networks are, how they differ, how it works, how you validate or not the session, and so on. It is less primitive now than it was 5 years ago, but there is still work to be done because Tesla set the pattern in 2012. You drive up to the station, which your car has navigated you to. Okay, you don't have to figure it out. The car's like, okay, you have to go 500 miles. I need to stop for 22 minutes here and 18 minutes here. I'll take you there. You drive up to the charging dock, you pull out the cable, plug it in, and you walk away. All the billing is done, all the validation is done, all the rest of it. That's great for Tesla because they controlled the car and the charging station and the software. Not so easy when Ford built the car. The charging station is run by a company called Electrify America, and there's a third-party transaction validation somewhere in there for your credit card or whatever. There's a way around this, but no one knows that. And you do not get this stuff explained to you in detail, how it works at the salesman's discussion. You may learn it from your friends and your neighbors, etc. And over time, people internalize it. I've done various long trips in EVs. I can always find a fast charging station. It may be fast. It may be slower, fast. The reliability, which initially was hit or miss, I would say 3, 4, 5 years ago, maybe 2 out of 3 of my charging attempts work. We're now up to 4 out of 5. That's not good enough because when was the last time you drove up to a gas station and could not fuel, period, right? Especially if it's the only gas station within 12 miles. So it's getting better. There are more charging stations out there, so there are more alternatives, and the reliability is inching up. They're not trivial problems, but they are solvable problems. And one of the challenges is just getting people past this mindset of how you fuel. You're going to fuel at home, or if you live in a multi-unit dwelling, and that's sort of the next bit, you're going to fuel in your parking lot. Or if you have a townhouse, if you have a garage, great, you can set up a charging station. Otherwise, there's various ways to do it overnight, or also fueling at work, which is one that people always forget. But the important thing is for those road trips, there is high-speed charging out there, but most people only use it once or twice or 3 times a year. So they're not as familiar with it. They don't have the muscle memory like you do. Okay, drive into the gas station, fillers on that side, drive up to the pump on this side, credit card, plug it in, stand there and whistle. I live in a state where you have to hold the pump. Some states still have handle jockeys. And we will get there. Remember, we've only been fast charging EVs for 13 years. But at this moment, it is a little bit less obvious. And most of all, the buyers aren't getting it explained to them properly.
Yeah, there's so many friction points that I think is part of the reason why it's not being explained. Early on, of course, there was a knowledge gap at the dealership level, but even as we've moved past that and there's been more intentionality in developing the dealer to be able to speak to the product and how the product is used, both in a home charging context or if that's not an option in a public charging context. It's all about that information exchange. It's all about that knowledge sharing. So dealers have gotten better, but we know there's plenty of proof, and many people have experienced it. Early on, going to a dealership, there was an intention to convert away from the EV, if that's what the prospective buyer was looking at, to something that made sense to the salesperson. And charging has been a part of that. Where do I charge? How do I charge? And you mentioned about, kind of no one's really trying to speak to the education aspect of how many networks are out there. If we zoom out and take the top, 5, 10 out of the equation, we zoom far out. I want to say that it's close to 70 types of networks that are out there. Mid-tier, national, regional operators that maybe have less than 100 ports in their portfolio, but they're out there. And that's a lot. But again, how does the consumer know that? How does those that aren't, you said it on early on, those that are not an EV operator now, the way that they get to even close to considering it is they've got 4 resources in their life: family, friends, coworkers, someone that knows about the experience and can talk to them through the practical steps. How long does it take to charge? Where do I charge? All of that.
I think one of the interesting things is going to be the continuing spread of EV charging past its current model. My colleague Lauren McDonald of Chargenomics uses the phrase charging 2.0. But basically, the first 12, 15 years of charging were find a parking lot where they'll let you have a strip on the outside that is somewhere within spitting distance of a high voltage line, drop in a bunch of electrical equipment. 6 weeks before you launch, figure out the user interface, which has been, quite frankly, one of the pain points. And lo and behold, you have a charging station. But as we know from fueling at gas stations, as opposed to fueling with electrons, gas stations make some money. I always thought they didn't make money selling gas. They actually make maybe 10, 20 cents a gallon. Not a ton, but enough. But
you're right, driven by their throughput. Yeah.
Well, driven by throughput, but also the bulk of their profits come from selling salty snack food, sugary sodas, beer, cigarettes, and lottery tickets. Okay. Now, if you have 3 times the dwell time, I mean, all my friends are like, oh, I can be in and out and fuel in 5 minutes. I'm like, did you pee? Did you buy something to eat or drink? Really? But if you are staying, let's say, for 20, 25 minutes, what is the higher end, higher dollar thing that they can squeeze out of you? Maybe, I don't know, custom coffee drinks or fancy sandwiches, whatever it is. So that's an opportunity. You still need the real estate. But what we are seeing now is this move away from pure CPOs, which means charging networks, networks that sell charging to the public, and into charging as an ancillary. And as a friend of mine he actually started in the mini storage business, but he's made a very great deal of money in mini storage. So he said, don't ever count out this convenience stores. They measure this stuff. They have the real estate. They know where the traffic is. They only locate them in places where there is a lot of traffic. And he said they will start to see business models in charging. Well, he said this probably 3 years ago. Lo and behold, I now have a convenience store chain, to my shock, that has a Tesla row of chargers in one, and then 12 miles up, a row of Electrify America chargers in my little town in the Hudson Valley. So, this is going to start to happen. And that way, it doesn't have to be live or die on selling electricity because, quite frankly, there's a lot of hardware, but electricity is kind of fungible. And you're never going to get rich, let alone pay off the VCs who thought you were going to make them rich by selling electricity alone. What else can you do? What else can you sell those drivers? What else can you? And the point I started at, my apologies. The point I started at was when convenience stores have electric charging, there is a way for them to wrap it in and normalize it because they have loyalty programs. I'm fairly non-loyal or profligate with convenience stores. Wherever I can get stuff, I'll stop in on a road trip and get it. There are people who frequent the same ones over and over again. They get discounts, etc. When you get a discount on your EV charging, boom.
Yeah, that is one of the things that's compelling to the retailer, the petroleum retailer, is to make sure that if they're going to offer EV charging, that it integrates with all their loyalty programs well. So that way the EV driver, the EV driver has the same experience as the gasoline or diesel customer. Yeah,
except stays longer.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and the conversion rate is higher too because for the EV driver, for the petroleum retailer versus 2-3 minutes at the pump and you're done, you may not go in the store. The EV driver is going in the store potentially twice. But thanks, John. This has been a great conversation. I got one more thing I want to ask you as we get ready to kind of round this out. I would like to hear your comments on the direct to consumer versus the dealership model. We know Tesla, and I know this is kind of shifting from our conversation about charging infrastructure, but I wanted to hear your comments and insights on this. Tesla and Rivian, of course, bypass the dealer model entirely. While legacy OEMs, we know they're locked into managing franchise economics as it relates to getting their products in the market. Does the direct consumer model materially help EV adoption? Or maybe this is a broader question for automotive in general, but does that direct to consumer model help EV adoption, or is it just shifting the pain to different part of the system? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure we have enough experience to make that call right now. Certainly, I think the pain moves to different places. I would point out that automobiles are, as far as I'm aware, the sole consumer good, high volume, high dollar consumer good, where you are not allowed to buy them from the manufacturer under most state franchise laws. That is, in fact, illegal. You must buy them through a third-party retailer. Now, Apple seems to be able to sell very expensive phones and computers, both at its own stores and through retailers. But auto dealers and their lobbyists will tell you, and have certainly told me over 15 years, exactly why that's a totally wrong comparison. And people actually love haggling for their cars. They don't call it haggling. I don't happen to believe that. And if you look at the consumer data, in fact, even if someone walks into a car dealership and gets an objectively good deal compared to the average price for that car, more often than not, they will feel taken advantage of. And it's the process. It's the worst dealers who are dragging everything down. You're only as good as your worst employee. So where I think dealer or franchise dealers may come into their own is service, because what we are now seeing with Tesla in particular, and I expect Rivian to go through some of this as well, is that, hey, for Tesla, you cannot talk to a human about servicing your car. You must use the app, book an appointment. The machine will spit out based on what you say the problem is. I'm sure there's AI in there because it's 2025. The machine will spit out, okay, if you're very lucky, or if you're a friend of Elon, we will send a guy in a truck around tomorrow. If you're less lucky, but still sort of lucky, okay, next Monday, bring it in. And if it's something non-mission critical, we'll give you an appointment 9 weeks from Thursday. They are simply overwhelmed. Now, Tesla, like any car maker with new models, any startup, has had its share of quality issues. I'm increasingly tired of Tesla fans explaining that everything will be solved with over-the-air updates. Some of it can be solved with over-the-air software updates. Cracking suspension arms cannot. And so I think it's very much a work in progress right now to sort out if Tesla can keep up with both adding large volumes of new EVs on the road and servicing an increasingly aging volume of EVs that they have sold. That's, I think, going to be our first case. Rivian really only started producing in volume a few years ago. They might have the same. I don't know. Hopefully, they'll take lessons from Tesla. But clearly, people like the non-franchise dealership salesperson model, where you go in, you have people who will explain everything, go through it as much as you need. And so I think, ask me again 5 years, maybe 10 years from now.
Fair enough. Well, John, appreciate you coming on Field Frequency and sharing these insights. It's been a great conversation. For those that want to connect with you, how can they reach out to you? How can they follow your work? Obviously, contributing editor, car and driver, your materials out there. But if someone wanted to connect with you, how would they do so?
The great thing is I have a surname that is very search optimized. If you remember all the letters in it, and I'm assuming they'll be in this, I will spell it. It's V like Victor, Oelcker. First name John, John. Just Google that name, spell it properly with EVs, and you will get a bucket ton of links. Okay. And, certainly I'm on social media. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Blue Sky. And so feel free to follow me. Love comments. Actually, one of the interesting, because basically I sit at home in a room when I'm not driving or flying to drive. I'm sitting at home in a room by myself, but love interacting with actual human readers. I know they're out there. And the last thing, I'm going to trespass on your hospitality. My side gig when I'm not writing about EVs is something called Tempting Fate Tours, which is a YouTube channel about highly questionable, stupid road trips in very dubious old cars, often British. And I'll give you one example. We drove a 70 and a 75-year-old car with 30 and 27 horsepower, respectively, 1,000 miles through Europe and the UK. Slowly. So anyway, Tempting Fate Tours if you like old cars and people doing stupid things with them, and otherwise search for my name.
Yeah. No worries. We can link to that channel on our landing page, on the Field Frequency landing page. Well, John, thank you for being on Field Frequency. It was a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
This episode was produced and edited by the team at Autozy. To find out more, visit autozy.co, autozy.co.